Yes,
Yeah.
that is a good idea. So let me start. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, дорогие друзья, and of course, good morning to all of those of you who are just starting their day, and very welcome to our second event of the Russophone Voices, Words and Worlds of Russophone Russian language literature. My name is Miriam Finkelstein. I teach Russian literature at the University of Graz in Austria. And before I introduce our guests, I would like to say very short words about our project as such, because the Russophone Voices are, or is, a collaborative project of my colleagues, Naomi Kafi, whom you see on my left, I guess, who is an assistant professor of Russian at Reed College in Portland, Nina Fries, who is in the audience today, who is a researcher with the Berlin-based Center for East European and International Studies, and Marco Poleri, whom you see, I think, at the down screen, who is an adjunct professor of history of Eastern Europe at the University of Bologna, and of course myself. And our project seeks to bring together authors and scholars and readers and everyone who is interested from around the world to discuss contemporary Russophone literature. So tonight it is my great pleasure to introduce to you our guests, Andrey Kurkov from Ukraine and Yuriy Serebriansky from Kazakhstan. Andrey Kurkov, as you all probably know, is a novelist, essayist, president of PEN Ukraine. And I think that it is safe to say that on a global scale, he is one of the best known Russophone prose writers from Ukraine. He authored more than 20 novels, as well as numerous books for children. And if I were to name some of my personal favorites, I would certainly mention Picnic на льду, Добрый ангел смерти from 1997, Игра в отрезанный палец from 2007, and Lvovskaya gastrolь Jimi Hendrixa. Many of these novels are available in translation. They were actually translated in more than 20 languages. Frequently, or almost always, his texts focus on present-day Ukraine, on its society, as well as in cultural and political developments. And for tonight's event, he very kindly provided a video in which he reads from one of his most recent novels, Серые пчелы, Gray Bees, in which he addresses the war in Donbass. And you can watch the video on our Facebook page. So welcome, Andrey, and thank you very much for being here tonight with us. Our next guest is Yuriy Serebriansky, a prolific writer whose work covers a wide range of genres. He has published several books of short stories and повести, among others, My Caravaggio from 2006, Черная звезда, The Black Star from 2019, which he co-authored with Бахаджан Мумушулы. For his повести Destination, Дорожная пастораль, as well as Прожаки, Yuriy Serebriansky was nominated for the Russkая премия Award in 2010 and 2014, respectively. In 2011, he published a most astonishing and I would say amazing book called Казахстанские сказки, a Russian-Kazakh bilingual collection of fairy tales or stories with strong fantastic elements that address some of the most pressing issues of the Kazakhstani contemporary society. Now, when he's not writing prose, be it повести or fairy tales, Yuriy Serebriansky also writes poetry. His collection of poems «Рукопись найдена в затылке» was published in 2010. Yuriy also provided us with a short video in which he reads from his most recent book with the brilliant title «Книга о вкусной и здоровой казахстанской литературе». This video is also available on our Facebook page. Now, thank you very much, Yuriy, for joining us, especially in the light of the fact that it must be probably already fairly late in Almaty. So thank you for being here with us tonight. In the next hour together, yes?
Just say thank you for
Thank you. We are grateful for you being here tonight. So a couple of words maybe on tonight's event. In the next hour, Marco Naomi will discuss together with Andrey and Yuriy questions about what it means to be a Russophone writer, what it means to write in Russian outside of Russia. And after the discussion, we will have a Q&A session, and you are welcome to post your questions in the Q&A using the Q&A function of the webinar. Will find it below on your screens. And maybe I am allowed to ask both of you the first question tonight, namely pertaining the issue of what it means to be, to each of you individually, what it means to be a Russophone writer, русскоязычный писатель, what it means to you, what the term Russophone literature means to you, if at all anything. Maybe you can start by telling us how you identify yourselves in these terms, or if they are meaningful to you at all. Maybe Andrey could go first. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I'll try to be brave. And I remember that in the beginning of the 90s, I was thinking how to identify myself because of the political changes when Ukraine became independent. And at that time, actually, there was not much literary life in Ukraine because Soviet Ukrainian literature was dead. Post-Soviet was not born yet. And there were many writers who were writing still in Russian language, writers of older generation. And it was clear that I didn't manage and I didn't want to become a Soviet writer, because Soviet writer implies that actually you write also probably mostly in Russian, although there were many Soviet Ukrainian writers writing in Ukrainian. But it took me some years probably to decide that I'm a Ukrainian writer of Russian origin who writes in the language of his origin. It sounds a bit bulky, but I think usually it doesn't leave people with more questions than the first question. I mean, I like the term Russophonie because I was on the jury of the prize Russophonie in France for the best translations from Russian language. And I worked also with Russkaya Premia as a member of the jury. And at that time, probably some 10 years ago, I thought more about what is happening with Russian language and came to a conclusion that actually the story of Francophonie is repeated in the story of Russophonie, because I mean, the empire is gone or partially is gone. The language spread or remained on the outskirts of empire and in the places where an active migration went. And then actually every place like Israel, for example, or Moldova, or Belarus, or Ukraine, became partially also representative areas of a new Russian language literature. And this Russian language literature usually was not depicting Russian life. It was depicting local life, which was not anymore Soviet. So for me, yes, I'm a Russophone writer. I write mostly about Ukraine, but also about Europe. I don't write about Russia because I don't really know what is happening there, apart from the information in mass media and following the stories of Navalny and everybody else. So actually, the language remained my instrument, but this language is, my Russian language is detached from contemporary Russian literature and Russian culture, which exists in Moscow, in Yekaterinburg, etc. So I am one of probably still many Russian language writers who live in Ukraine and who write mostly about Ukraine.
Thank you very much. Yuriy.
Okay, but first of all, I would like to thank for inviting me to this event, and it's a pleasure to be in such a good company. Okay, yes, for me as also probably being a Russophone author is the most comfortable and natural positioning at the moment. When I'm speaking in Russian, I prefer Russian-speaking author. русскоговорящий автор. And I love Russian literature and learn from Russian writers whole my life, but I never did parallels with, for example, Chekhov's world and my Soviet reality, my Soviet past, or Dostoevsky world. I've been reading O. Henry at the same time and realized that I'm on the same distance from these worlds. And as for example, for Dovlatov's works, yes, I feel like it describes my Soviet past. As an editor, I'm working with Russian contemporary literature in a magazine Literatura, and I have to admit, interesting thing that how to Russian classic literature and the contemporary Russian literature collide. And another thing that Russian classic literature never pressed me by only language. When speaking about Kazakhstan, Kazakhstani identity, this word, Kazakhstani, is controversial and discussing, and very important for me because this Stani is my space. And I feel like it becomes smaller, and the Russian language in Kazakhstan and Delhi. Oh, okay. So maybe this short answer.
That's just fine.
For the question.
That's just fine. Thank you so much. So speaking of multilingual and multicultural contexts that both of you are writing in, I have a series of questions about translation and about different languages that may be influencing the works that you write and the reading audiences who encounter your works. I would be interested to hear you talk about your experiences with literary translation, with collaborating possibly with other writers who are representing other literary traditions. How does translation or connecting to readers in other languages fit into your work as a whole? So I will possibly, Yuriy, could you begin? Your thoughts about translation and influences from other languages?
Okay, thank you for this question, Naomi. I'll try. So when I'm working with when I'm trying to work with a Polish or American or Kazakh literature as a translator, it is a process of understanding metaphors, games, and etc. And I can easily follow the intertextuality and stuck somewhere reading side information, and the translation could not happen probably. But working with author directly might be a lot of fun for both. I had this experience last year working with my workshop, together with my workshop with American contemporary literature. We were asking direct questions to American authors, and it was interesting. And as a result, we had a book of translations of contemporary American short stories. And of course, I learned a lot reading literature in Polish, in English, and I'm limited by these two languages. And I always carrying with me one wonderful book, Granica Lasu, by a Polish poet, Małgorzata Lebda, and this is very important for my Polish part of my identity. I learn a lot, and I'm learning a lot, and I'm even constructing false memories. And my last 3 books released in Kazakhstan was it was in Russian, Eastern Russian, and in Kazakh in one volume. And this is very important for me as a letting me be a Kazakhstani author. Okay.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Yuriy. Andrey, your thoughts about translation and writing cross-culturally or transnationally?
Well, I myself don't translate. I tried as a young man to translate American writer, actually, and it was my diploma in the Foreign Languages Institute. And I submitted this translation to a literary magazine, and the editor was very happy, but 2 years later he said that he lost the translation. So I'm a lost translator, and that's why I'm a found writer. I speak more or less fluently 6 languages, and I did also study Japanese for 4.5 years in the 80s. So for me, languages are, first of all, music. It's actually not sometimes musical instruments, sometimes melodies, etc. But anyway, it's just a structure filled with musical sounds and with rhythms and intonations. And I travel usually, before pandemic at least, I was traveling 6 months a year in different countries, listening to the languages, including those which I love but don't understand, like Malayalam in Kerala in India, where I go every year to run workshops. But I mean, when I started writing actually with the poems and then short stories, jokes, and I was under influence of writers and poets like Khlebnikov and Daniil Harms and Boris Pilnyak, etc. So I was crazy about linguistic experiments and experiments in syntaxes, in lexic. I was inventing new words and new phrases and new fake set phrases with which I had problems later with my translators, who were sure that I am mistaken in writing. So they were correcting my fake set up phrases without telling me. But generally, what I like always to find a special melody and intonation for each novel, and then to keep it alive until the very end of the novel. And in this sense, it is definitely linguistic influence and musical influence, because I did 10 years of piano playing as a child. So for me, actually, music and languages are very relative. I would say relatives. They are very close to each other.
Mm. And if I could ask a follow-up question, what do you think about your works, Yuriy and Andrey, being translated into Kazakh and Ukrainian? How would you describe your relationship with the titular language of the country where you're living?
Okay, who will start? Well, I can start. I'll try to be dynamic and brief. My first translation into Ukrainian was organized by one political foundation, actually, in the times of President Kuchma. And I thought that it was not necessary because everybody reads Russian. But of course, I accepted it because I wanted to feel more legalized in Ukrainian literature. But then afterwards, actually, the other writers became translated into Ukrainian, and the Ukrainian literary process became much more dynamic. And at some point, I had a feeling that Ukrainian language readers read much more than Russian language readers in Ukraine. And probably today I would say the same, although the situation is a bit different. We went through different phases. So now probably more than half of my novels are translated into Ukrainian. And I meet very often readers, especially in Western Ukraine, who say that they will not read my works in Russian in principle because they want to read my works in Ukrainian. They don't read Russian, although they speak and they understand, but for political reasons, for historical reasons, for traumas of Holodomor, etc. And now, of course, from 2014, after annexation of Crimea and the beginning of the war in Donbass, the Russian language also is referred to very often as a language of enemy. So for me, the issue is whether the translation is good or bad. And since we have a lot of translations from Russian into Ukrainian, part of the translations are done with Google Translate program, which is awful and very often not edited. And I'm checking very thoroughly my translations of my works in Ukrainian because of this. I rely on my French, Japanese, and other translators. I don't check them. But with the Ukrainian language, you should be careful, because it seems it is very easy to translate because the languages are related and there are many similar words and similar sentence structures. But in fact, actually, the more Ukrainian writers write in Ukrainian, the richer the language becomes. And you want your text to correspond, translation to correspond to the level of the text of the original. So I say, I have books which were criticized for bad translations, into Ukrainian. Usually, if the translation is good, there is no praise to a translator, which is also a minus. But it means that actually the translation is good if nobody criticizes the translated novel.
And Yuri, what about the Kazakh language?
So as for Kazakhstan, the situation looks more peaceful than in Ukraine, of course. But okay, I have this story. I was invited to a presentation of a Kazakh language writer, and one of my colleagues invited me, and they unexpectedly asked me to say a few words. And I was trying to answer questions from the audience, from this small audience, and I realized that they don't know almost nothing about Russian speaking writers world, and I don't know almost nothing about the Kazakh writers world. So the main problem in Kazakhstan, the huge problem, is the absence of translations of contemporary literature. We have these two really separate worlds: Kazakh literature world and Russian-speaking Russophone literature world, and we don't have a governmental institution who will try to somehow translate one world literature to another, to get to know one world with another world. We, as an open literature school, Almaty Open Literature School, trying to do something like by providing festivals in Kazakhstan, but it's just like a single events. As for my own books reception in Kazakh, it's really important to have a translation in Kazakh language in Kazakhstan. It's really important, and I'm really proud that my works have an interest to be translated into Kazakh language. And I cannot actually say anything about the quality of translation, because I don't know Kazakh language enough to read the literature. I work with Kazakh authors as translators, but like we have to sit next to each other and discuss all the intertextuality to come to some result, let's say some result. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and this very nicely segs into our next set of questions about reception. So Marco, please.
Yes, thank you, Yuri and Andrei. I guess that we will have the chance also to come back to internal dynamics in Ukraine and Kazakhstan later. I would now like to switch maybe the focus of our conversation to, from your own understanding of your literary experience, to the way your works are received and interpreted worldwide. So the position of readers and critics about your works. Most external observers usually think that Russian language literatures path to success goes through Moscow. I believe that maybe the case of Andrey can tell us something something important about that, because it quite contradicts this kind of expectation from the public. So maybe Andrey can tell us something about how the way the broader public, so readers and critics, understand and interpret your work, and if you can see and if you can find any difference from the way your works are perceived in Russia, in other Russian-speaking countries, or in the West, for example. So please, Andrey.
Well, I mean, I should first of all say that my works are not well known at all in Russia. I had a lot of books published there in the 1990s and then 2004. But since then, actually, I think everything is quiet and I don't exist there. And as to my readers in other countries, my readers are usually not really Russophones. I have readers who are Russian migrants to Israel, to Germany, to Poland. They come to my events, but they are minority because most of my readers in these countries are foreign readers for whom I represent post-Soviet topic in literature. I remember that, well, my first book, translated first into German, Picnic auf dem Eis, Picnic na lьду, I mean, it became a bestseller because it was, I would say, the book about dark times, but without really unhappy end and without too much darkness. So I was perceived as somebody who can explain with humor the tragedy of the collapse of the Soviet Union and what happened to its inhabitants, etc. So this was the beginning. And I remember that my first actually readers were retired people who had money and were brave enough to buy books by unknown name. And then suddenly students got interested, and then middle class, and then the book started being translated in different countries. And they were perceived very differently in different countries, as you mentioned, because the same Picnic on the Ice, this was like normal belletristic for Germany, but suddenly in France it was positioned as ironical philosophical novel, and in the United States as a political novel. So I had different audiences in different countries. And I was surprised when I was on a book tour in America that my actually events were run not in the bookshops, but in political clubs in different cities. And the questions were starting with the book and finishing with the political situation, my predictions, what will happen between Russia and Ukraine, etc., etc., etc. So I'm quite used to the idea that the same book can be read in many different ways, depending on the cultural, political, and other background of the reader, or even of the nation of these readers.
Okay, thank you, Andrey. So maybe now Yuriy can tell us something.
Okay. I think there is no difference in my work reception by Russophone or Russian readers. For the rest of the world, let's say like this pathetic way, I'm an exotic writer with familiar topics or unfamiliar topics, and this rest of the world is too small to get to any conclusions yet. As for the Russia, I know personally almost all the critics, experts, except probably Dmitry Bykov in Russia, and I never been reflected properly by critics in Russia, except like 3 single cases, and probably I missed my generational leaders, or maybe Dmitry Bykov not familiar with my works, and I think contemporary Russian prose literature reflecting the internal situation, it makes it interesting abroad. And as a Russophone author, I have to find my own way my own topics, and identity is one of my topics, let's say like this. And the audience of philologists and the students, this is my main auditory. They adore me, and I love them too.
Okay, thank you, Yuri. Maybe still a pending question is the one about the main publication venues or platforms for discussing Russophone literature today. At least in your experience, when or where did you have the chance to discuss with other Russophone authors coming from other countries, for example, identifying yourselves as Russophone authors, and so discussing the room for this literary production? I don't know if in your experience you had other chances as the one we are having today together. So maybe we can start with Yuri and then go to Andrei.
I think Russian prize, Russkaya Premia, comes in mind first. For me, I remember those two ceremonies, and especially the private meetings after the ceremonies, these parties. Everything happens after on after parties, and I met Alexander Kabanov and Vladimir Rafeenko from Ukraine. We talk a lot. I think Russkaya Premia, and I had the privilege to saw Natalia Gorbanevska's speech. A lot of memories for me about Russkaya Premia, and that was a Russian institution as a prize initiated by Russian magazines. I think Sergei Ivanovich Chuprinin from Znamya magazine. Okay.
Thank you, Yuri. So maybe Andrei can tell us something more about that.
Not really. I mean, I'm not following any platforms now on Russian language literature. I check always who are translated from Russian into foreign languages, and then I get interested in what kind of literature these writers are writing. And although, I mean, I was attached to the Russkaya Premia and to Russophonie, so I knew a lot of names, of course, and a lot of texts coming from all around the world for these prizes. And I also, I mean, Vladimir Rafeenko is the name for me, is very important name for me, but it is very interesting that actually he started writing in Ukrainian now, and his book in Ukrainian is nominated, shortlisted actually for the National State Literary Prize, Shevchenko Prize. But for example, I'm very much interested by books written by Vladimir Larchenkov, who lived in Chisinau many years ago, and from there was sending his manuscripts to Russkaya Premia. Now he's living in Montreal, and we met a year ago. I'm more interested actually in Russophone literature outside Russia, because it's easier to understand what is happening and what the people are writing, what they are referring to in their books. So although, I mean, Mikhail Shishkin is another example, he is a Russophone Russian writer living in Switzerland, having all the, or keeping the traditions of classical Russian literature from my point of view, but at the same time physically being detached from the Russian literary society. So for me, another paradox is like Vladimir Sorokin, whom I love and know for many years. I mean, for me, he is a Russophone writer from Berlin, although I know that he spends half a year probably in Russia every year in Vnukovo. But I mean, he is not connected to the processes that I don't understand. So I mean, what he is writing is, first of all, it's the continuation of his own tradition and his own reflection. of the things that are bothering him. And the same, I mean, he remains a very specific case, somebody with his own voice, his own style, his own sort of literary smile, not a very, I would say, choosing a word which will not upset people, but I mean, he is very clever and very sharp in his humor, and this humor is very cynical very often. So I mean, this combination makes him like standing apart, away from the bulk of the contemporary Russian literature.
Okay, thank you, Andrey. So I guess that's time maybe to switch to talk about domestic dynamics in both Kazakhstan and Ukraine. Maybe Naomi can introduce the situation in Kazakhstan and discuss this with Yuriy first.
Yes, so Yuriy, I was really struck by how you described the literary field in Kazakhstan as being bifurcated into two different worlds, the Russophone world and the Kazakh-speaking world. And I was also struck by how you reflected that in the Stan part of Kazakhstani being your space. And I'm curious to hear more about what goes on in that space. How would you additionally characterize the space of Russian language literature in Kazakhstan? And you mentioned institutions like the Open Literary School, and I'm curious to hear about what other institutions are characterizing this Russophone world of Kazakhstani writing.
Mm-hmm. Well, the controversiality of the situation here that we have many good Russian Russophone authors, but we have almost zero readers audience for these authors. Last disastrous year, I was working on my book. It's actually a collection of essays and interviews with contemporary writers who got established during the period of independence, last 30 years, and I got several definitions, like Kazakh writer, like Russian-speaking writer, Kazakhstani writer, Kazakhstani literature, Kazakh literature, Russian Kazakh literature, etc. So I think the position of Russian language in Kazakhstan required rethinking, and I agree with Andrey that I could find I could find the similarities with Russophone situation, with a Francophone situation, and the topic of post-colonial becomes very popular here in Kazakhstan during the last 5 years. I think in 2012 I read like these 3 books. Голодная степь by Sarah Cameron, dedicated to post-colonial matters. Collection of essay by Madina Tlostanova, and a collective monograph, Memory Alive. And I took part in this collective monograph as a representative of a Polish diaspora also. And I think this is a proper moment to start this revising of Russian language in Kazakhstan. But it looks like an utopia now for me, because we need like Leopold Sedar Selor to be born here. Okay.
Thank you very much. And Marco, did you want to add anything in a question for Andrey on this topic?
Yes, also following what Yuriy was talking about, I think that it is no coincidence, in my view, to have today both Andrey and Yuriy, because they are not only renowned Russian language writers, but they are quite active figures also in the dealing with cultural institutions and in the broader intellectual environments in Kazakhstan and Ukraine. While preparing my questions for this meeting, I was fascinated by reading your commentaries on the issue of Russian language in Kazakhstan and Ukraine, and also on your proposal. I was fascinated by your proposal, or your, in a way, a wish to reappropriate Russian in both Kazakhstan and Ukraine. Andrey wrote in a couple of essays, and also said in a couple of interviews about the need for creating a Ukrainian, or institutionalizing, we could say, a Ukrainian variation of Russian language. So I would ask Andrey maybe to tell us something more about what this kind of institutional position, so the idea of creating a Ukrainian variation of Russian, what this could mean for the future, for example, of Russophone literature in Ukraine. As far as we know, the situation is quite different from the one that Yuriy talked about in Kazakhstan, because Ukrainian language writer and Russian language writers collaborate. You recently wrote and published a book with another Ukrainian author, such as Vinichuk. So we see. My question to you is maybe to explain us, to describe to us maybe what are the current developments of Russophone literature in your country, and especially what could these new institutions created in the aftermath of post-Maidan, in post-Maidan Ukraine, change the situation in your country, also for Russophone literature? The microphone, please.
Yep. Sorry, it's quite a complex question that you posed. Yes, I mean, I thought a lot in the not so remote past about possibility of legalizing Russian speakers in Ukraine, but it was not taken very easily by many in Ukraine. And when I was suggesting that a small institution to be organized to study Ukrainian variant of Russian language, and even Ukrainian variant of Russian and other minority languages, it also didn't go well, and I was criticized quite heavily. And it's funny because the most severe criticism was coming from Russian language speakers, who were saying that no, we should keep the what do you call it, the standards of Russian language coming from Moscow, from Russia. So there is a double danger in this issue. And the only way forward is probably to accept that Russian language literature is another minority literature existing in Ukraine. In order to have this idea accepted, we should accept also and promote the neither Russian nor Ukrainian, but Crimean Tatar literature in Ukraine, Hungarian language literature. We have writers writing also in Polish, in Yiddish, in Gagauz language. So once we have this, I would say that a collection of different colors of Ukrainian state literature, then we can say that, well, there is a space, legal space for Russian language literature. But what was interesting recently, there is a very talented group of journalists and bloggers who are recording YouTube blogs about Ukraine, about different ethnic groups, etc. And they had a very long discussion between themselves how to portray a Russian ethnic Ukrainian group. And in the end, they went to old believers living on Danube River, and there are also old believers in Bukovina. So one group didn't want to tell about their life at all. The other was presented as ethnic Russians. So historically, they are probably the most ancient ethnic Russians in Ukraine, but they were, of course, not representing the Russian language group because the Russian language speakers are not ethnic group. It's a social phenomena. And this phenomena is very, fluid, because sometimes you think that you suddenly have more of them out there in the Ukrainian public world, sometimes less. They are manipulated for political reasons. So some Ukrainians think that if somebody speaks Russian, it means he is pro-Russian, pro-Yanukovych, pro-Putin, etc. And nobody is trying actually to structuralize and to understand the situation. So my hope that it's quite a, I would say, risky thing to say, but my hope that people who are not ethnic Russians, they will slowly go to their real mother tongue or mother language culture. Because, I mean, we have, for example, maybe 100,000, maybe less Armenians, and they are all Russian speakers. And I would like them to create Armenian language culture in Ukraine to add more color, more brightness to Ukrainian state culture. Because, I cannot refer myself to all this incognito Russian language, 7 million or more of Ukrainian citizens, because I don't know who are they. And this is also interesting because, Ukrainians are united by the language. Russian speakers are not united by Russian language. Ukrainian writers are united by the Ukrainian language. Russian language writers are disunited. They are not organized. There are groups which are more friendly to each other or less indifferent to each other, but you don't see the writing in Russian as a process, as a sort of a national process of social process. No, there are many writers. Each one is single or maybe with a friend. They are not, except for Alexander Kabanov, who organizes a festival, poetry festival in Kiev for people coming from Russia, from Belarus, for Russian language and Ukrainian language poets. Yeah, everybody else is staying apart and just watching what is happening and writing. And actually, the Ukrainian Russian language writers, mostly they have lower print runs, lower sales than Ukrainian language writers, although the situation on the book market is anyway very bad in Ukraine, because the main buyer of the books in Ukraine is the state, which gives money to the libraries to buy the books. And according to the law, the libraries are buying only books in the official state language, in the Ukrainian language. So, of course, there might be bitterness on the Russian language writers' side, unless they understand that they should have their translations into Ukrainian also, so that the books were disponible in the libraries. So it's quite complicated. It's quite complicated, but I think the Russian language readers in Ukraine for 20 years, they were reading books written in Russia, not written by Russian language writers in Ukraine. For them, local Russian language writers were not important. And when we have now economical situation, when people cannot afford buying books, and the books from Russia are more expensive than books from Ukraine, so a lot of older generation readers either stopped reading at all, or they read less than they used to. So, for example, if I were not published abroad, I would be puzzled to answer the question for whom I write.
Okay.
Thank you so much. And sorry.
No, thank you, Andrey. I would now maybe leave the floor to Miriam for the final question before opening the discussion.
Yes, thank you, Marco. Thank you, Andrey, so very much, and thank you, Yuriy, also. Actually, the last couple of sentences are pointing in the very direction of my question, of the final question. I would like to ask both of you about, if you were to speculate, what you would say about the future of the Russophone literature in your respective countries, the future of your work, future developments. I realize that this is today probably nothing more than a mere speculation, but nonetheless, if we could think about the situation in 10 years from now, 20 years from now, how do you think the situation will look like? Maybe Yuriy can go first.
Oh, this is the most complicated question for me. I'm not expecting a lot of changes on the next 10 years. I think while the expert society and expert institutions like literary prizes and state book promotional programs are associated with Russian literature and with Russia, there will be the way to achieve the audience through these programs. And as for my own works, I don't know. I have a story. Like I was in a Iowa IWP residence in 2017, and we had a panel together with my colleagues from many different countries, and there was a Tim Parks, British novelist who lives in Italy, also very known, well known in literary critic world. And after the panel, there was a party in a pub, Fox Head, very cult place for writers, and my deepest fear becomes a reality. I was sitting next to Tim Parks, drinking beer, and he asked me a question: "Who's your readers?" And I was not ready to answer at all, and probably I missed my biggest chance. And when I'm thinking about this situation, I'm thinking more about the situation than about the question of Tim Parks. So I don't know about the future of my works. I'm just working. Thanks.
Well, if the same question is posed to me, then I would say that I don't know about my books, because I think my books, some of my books will outlive me, but I don't know for how long, because I mean, there are so many good writers around and there are so many new names every day. So it's a normal, it's a natural competition. If we talk about the future in 10 years in Ukraine, then I want to remind myself words by one of the leading figures in Ukrainian contemporary literature, Oksana Zabushka, who said 15 years ago that in the future there will be no Russian language literature in Ukraine. I disagreed with her 15 years ago, and I disagree now, but I think the number of writers who write in Russian will become smaller, much smaller, and maybe they will be kept, as I say, I mean, they will just have their own niche, unless they become international authors. So if somebody becomes an international author, he will be by this legalized as a Ukrainian author and have the same attention as Ukrainian language writers. If a writer is working on a local market, in the literary process, not in the official language, and I should say that Ukrainian is becoming more and more popular. And the young people, actually, even from Russian language families, they are bilingual, and many of them actually, especially if they are intellectual, they prefer reading books by Ukrainian language writers because they are more brave, they are more experimental, they're creating new literature from zero, from point zero, in fact. And the Russian language writers, they're always in doubt whether they should be based on the tradition of Russian classical literature, or they should go to the experiments of 1920s, or something else. So I mean, it's always easy and more pleasant to be young and to begin something than to be older and to try to continue something. But I believe that in 10 years' time there will be still literature in Russian, but probably the authors will become also bilingual, and they will decide the choice of language according to the topic of the novel or of the piece of fiction. So there will be probably bilingual Russian-Ukrainian writers and non-bilingual, single-lingual Ukrainian writers.
Yes, thank you so very much for these insights. This is really, really exciting. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Yuriy. Thank you, Andrey, for these really, really exciting insights. You know, I think I have learned a lot tonight, and it was really, really fascinating. Now, our hour of discussion is over now, and I would like to open the floor for a general discussion. But before I do so, to all of those of you who cannot stay for the Q&A session, I wish to thank you for being here with us tonight and wish you a very good evening or day. But before I let you go, just one more thing from our side. I would like to invite you to our next event, which will take place later this year. We still don't have the exact date, but our next event will be dedicated to the publishers, to the publishing side of Russophone literatures. So please stay tuned for our future events. Thank you. So the floor is now open. We already have some questions, and I will read them aloud in order of appearance. So the first question to both of you is, what are the main issues of identity in Russophone literature in your countries and in your own literary work? You both touched on it contextually, but it would be very interesting to see whether it is simply a context.
Okay, who will start?
Yes, please, Andrey.
Okay, well, I mean, identity is connected with the language, but as much as also with the political reality of the country where a person lives. And so actually my Russian language sometimes comes as a contradiction to my Ukrainian mentality, because you know that Russian, from my point of view, Russians are the bearers of collective mentality. They are imperialists. I mean, they want to be one great nation ruled by one great Tsar, etc. So one should be part of many. Ukrainian mentality is based on the matrix of anarchy. That's why we have 350 political parties registered in Ministry of Justice. Everyone is important. Everyone is like defending his or her point of view. So, I mean, I have more this matrix of anarchy in my mentality, but I use the language of the origin to write about what I want to write. But of course, I mean, I look at the world and at the plots and at the stories with the eyes of political Ukrainian, and first of all, not ethnic Russian, secondly.
Thank you very much. Yuriy, please.
And as for the Kazakhstan, I think while we are not only using Russian language as an instrument, but also producing somehow Russian Russophone people at schools, I wish we could keep the situation like this. But revising the governmental programs, governmental language programs, I don't believe, I'm not sure Kazakhstan wants to keep multiculturality in future. As for me personally, this my multicultural identity. I'm a part Russian, part Polish, of course Kazakhstanian, and plus my broken identity issue with this Soviet heritage, let's say, gives me power in my works gives me power to move on with my works, a main power.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. The next question is addressed to Yuriy, in fact, and the question goes like this. Do you think that there is a chance of seeing more bilingual Kazakhstani authors in the future?
I hope so. I really like works of Kazakhstani poet Anwar Dusenbinov, who, in a way, using both languages in creating his poetry. So you can find Kazakh words and rhymes with Russian words in the same poem. But I think it's just a single example at the moment. And I hope future will give us more bilingual authors, and everything starts with the translations.
Thank you so much, Yuriy. The next question is again addressed to both of you, and it concerns a potential difference between prose and poetry. And the question goes like this. Are Russophone prose and Russophone poetry evolving differently in your respective country?
Well, okay, I think yes, there is a difference, because I have a feeling that the poets are more active than novelists in Russian language in Ukraine. Probably also because poets are more socialized between themselves, and they have direct access to their audiences. The novelists don't have direct access, and of course, and they require much longer period to work on something. And then if there is no criticism, there is no echo on the work. I mean, nobody notices. So this can demoralize a novelist. Whereas actually the poets get reaction at once. So I wouldn't be surprised to find out that some prosa writers in Ukraine decided to become poets in order to be more socialized and acceptable.
Thank you.
And I think prose just simply needs more time for to reflect in reality, and 30 years is not enough to say properly about these changes, even post-Soviet changes. And as for the poetry in Kazakhstan, we have like two different directions in Russian-speaking poetry. The Soviet generation of poets, who they will hate me for these words, they more dedicated to nostalgia, and these contemporary young poets working in Russian, who are more associated with the active class, creative class. Not only poets, it's a society of contemporary artists, poets, and activists, I think, this way.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yes, the next question again goes to both of you. Yuriy mentioned that Russian critics in Russia don't understand his work. Andrey mentioned that his books don't sell in Russia. I wonder, how can Russophone writers get more attention and more respect among Russian readers and Russian critics? Is there hope? Is this a worthwhile goal? So Andrey, maybe you could go first here again.
Well, I'm not looking for attention of Russian critics from Moscow or Petersburg. I mean, it's not important for me. I think what the situation means, it means that actually I don't write in contemporary Russian tradition. I write in Russian in European tradition. That's why my books are read in, and understood in Europe and not accepted in Russia. So, this phenomena can be discussed and probably discussed by critics, but not my books. I mean, I have enough attention from foreign critics. And again, I mean, as I said, I don't really understand contemporary Russian life today, as well as what are contemporary Russian writers living in Russia writing now. What is considered by readers good and what is not good. So I am a foreigner now to these issues. And I don't have enough time to try to catch up and to understand. Because I have a lot of projects, I write, I run workshops, etc. So please don't ask Russian writers to write critical material about my books.
We'll do our best. Thank you. Yuriy.
I'm also not chasing attention of Russian critics. And my way, I think, is to be published in literary magazines. Now, literary magazines are well represented in internet, and there are no limits, no borders. And I don't have a book published in Russia yet, and it's not frightening me very much, because I see the readers' attention through my publications in literary magazine. That's enough at the moment for me, I think.
Thank you very much. So if there are more questions from the floor, please, everyone, you're welcome to post them in the Q&A function. Otherwise, we will ask more questions. We always have questions. So maybe I would really like to ask both of you, and I would like to start by asking Andrey. You just mentioned something that really fascinated me, that you don't write in the Russian tradition, that for you other European traditions are a lot more important. Could you please elaborate on that? What traditions exactly are interesting and important for you in this respect, if it's not the Russian?
The thing is that, I mean, I don't create theories, and so this is just my observation. I remember that when Picnic on the Ice was written, then some Russian critics wrote that it is a very simple book with very short sentences, etc. It's nothing of importance, nothing of interest. At the same time, the book became popular in the Western countries, and then in the Eastern also, in Japan, in China. So it reminded me my love for Franz Kafka, for example, because I mean Kafka, even if he has longer sentences, the rhythm is of short sentences, and generally, I mean, this is the maybe also this is the question of importance I give to the story as versus the style, or the complicated style. I don't want to burden reader with codes and different difficult ways to find out what is happening. Although, I mean, I wrote different novels. I have a trilogy, Geography of a Single Gunshot, which is written in a very heavy style with very long sentences, etc. But generally, I mean, for me to tell the story is more important than to create some kind of literary carpet in which the reader should find the codes and the paths of the characters. So I think the literary Russian tradition is probably mostly based actually on Dostoevsky and Tolstoy. And for Tolstoy, of course, I mean, the atmosphere and the heaviness of the words which are used as bricks to create fortresses is very important. And Russian literature is also different. I mean, it is divided into the popular mass literature, which is written in a very simple way with very limited lexic, and heavy literature, which is usually nominated for the prizes. So I don't think I belong to either of them. So I'm telling stories in my own way, and this way is not, I would say, not acceptable, but not interesting probably for Russian readers, neither for mass literature readers nor highbrow readers.
Thank you very much. Yuriy, maybe you could comment on that.
Working as an editor of a literary magazine, Russian literary magazine, we are not really Russian literary magazine because the team, our team is international, totally international. I'm receiving a lot of short stories from Russian authors. Some of them are published in the magazine, and what I have to admit that a lot of topics focused on internal of Russian life, of Russian contemporary life. Maybe this is what you mean, or Andrey mean, the contemporary style of Russian writers, the topics, and when I'm reading Kazakhstani, for example, writers, Russophone writers, I find them more global, more focused on global things, because in Kazakhstan we never had a Russian literature as a dominated literature at schools, for example. We always had several literatures, at least Kazakh literature, Kazakh Soviet literature, okay, Russian literature, and also American literature, other traditions, and maybe this background gives the writers abilities to be more open, to be more global.
Mm-hmm.
But I have to admit that in Russian literature there are also exceptions.
Mm-hmm.
Can I add a few words? I just remembered that. Can you hear me? Yeah, I remember that actually in 1980s, it was very difficult to find good, interesting books in Kyiv bookshops. And a lot of active young readers, they were buying books in Polish because we had the socialist countries bookshop in the center of Kyiv in Krещатик. And Polish literature sometimes was read more, or translations into Polish, than books in Ukrainian or in Russian. So the Western literature was coming through Polish translation also to Ukrainian readers.
Mm-hmm. Thank
and
you.
it was
also. Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt. We do have two more questions, and I would really like to hear your opinions about this. So one of the next question is actually again addressed to both of you, the question is, what do you most want foreign readers to know about literature in your countries today, specifically the English language readers? So maybe we could.
May I start?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay. I remember very well the situation in a workshop of British authors. It was like in 2006 in Almaty, British author Tobias Hill, and he was amazed about contemporaneity of our Kazakhstani writers' works, and start to discuss the possibility to publish these contemporary works with contemporary topics in Britain with some governmental institution. But finally, we decided to publish in Britain some fairy tales, Kazakh traditional fairy tales, translated in English. And when we expecting the attention as a Kazakhstan of foreign readers, not only being an exotic country, but also contemporary modern country, we have to think maybe about these small issues as the translation of contemporary authors into foreign languages, because now Kazakhstan represented abroad by translations of classic Kazakh literature, classics, and some fairy tales, some folklore.
Mm-hmm.
And if you will visit a book fair, you will find this situation and see it clearly. So we need more contemporary authors to be translated in English, for example, into foreign languages, because they deserve it. They are trying to tell about the contemporary modern Kazakhstan.
Well, there are not so many Ukrainian writers who are translated into English, and the only thought that comes to my mind is that actually in the last year, two novels were published about situation in Donbass. One was published in America. It is Internat by Sergei Zhadan, and My Grey Bees were published in London. So the topical, I mean, like I think the English readers maybe, or publishers, they understand that the readers who do read translated literature, they want to find out from this literature about background and what is happening in the country of origin of the book. So it's not classical Ukrainian literature which is translated into English. It's only something which happens now in Ukraine.
Thank you so much. We have two more questions, and maybe you can just address the issues rather briefly. The next question is addressed to Yuriy, and the question is, which role does your Polish identity play, and what does it mean to you?
Well, it means a lot to me to be a Pole, to belong to Polonia, and like now I'm a PhD doctoral student in a Polish university, and as I become very emotional. Okay, I have a book titled Altenshаш. This is a collection of family stories, Polish families collected by our magazine who were deported to Kazakhstan in Stalin time. So in the beginning of 20th century, and I think this book is one of the most important for me personally.
Thank you so very much. Thank you. And we have one last question, this time addressed to Andrey. Andrey, you mentioned Kafka in your comment. Do you see yourself in this tradition of writing in an ex-imperial language, however, surrounded by those people whose language identity sees itself in opposition to this very empire?
Yeah, you can put it like this, but in my case, it is not purposely. I mean, I'm not writing purposely in Russian in order to sort of film myself or represent myself as the sort of symbol of ruined empire, or what is left from the empire. But the Kafka's, in fact, example is, I think it's very good, because it's Austrian-Hungarian Empire, and that made him to write in German. And the same about Paul Celan, who said at the same time, he said himself that the writer is writing the best in his mother tongue. So I mean, they were. I mean, he was writing in a city with 7 working languages on the street, but the imperial was only 1. But I think if I were to be alone Russian language writer in Ukraine or in Kiev, it could be, yes, some what do you call it, message, political message or linguistic political message, but I am not. And actually, my book, some of my books are compared to Kafka, but at the same time also to Bulgakov and to Gogol. So which all of them I loved and I read a lot. So I was probably just like fertilized, like a plant, like a tomato. I was fertilized by all these imperial literatures, and they stayed in me. So I am now representing what was happening in the literature 100 years ago, at least for myself. So it's, yes, it is true. It is a question of post-colonial. It is a question of what remains and what will happen next. But generally, it doesn't mean that this issue is influencing the topics of the fiction, of the novels, of the stories. Although I should say that I'm writing now a novel set in 1919 in Kiev, already second one. So I decided to write a series about very dark and very dramatic past, actually also about the collapse of another empire, of the previous Russian Empire, and what happened then. So probably you know more, or the person who asked the question knows more about me than I do.
Thank you so much. So you see, everyone profited today. The audience profited, we profited, and maybe you as well. So this is the ideal constellation. Our time is almost up, and we have, I think we have no further questions. Let me check one last time. We have a lot of thank you words in our section to thank both Andrey and Yuriy for this really interesting discussion. And so at this point, I think we can say goodbye to our audience. Thank you very much again for being here with us tonight. Stay tuned for future events. We post our news, our videos, and everything new that we have on our Facebook text. If you have any further questions, you can either check there or write to us personally, and we will answer as soon as possible. We look forward and we appreciate your interest in Russophone literatures and in our projects. And stay tuned for further events. Good night, everyone.
Well, thank you very much to all the organizers of this beautiful and very interesting discussion.
Thank you so much for the discussion, and have a good day for those who in America. A really good, peaceful day.
Yes.
So peaceful, emphasis
Second
on
one.
peaceful. Thank you so much, everyone. Take care.
Thank
We'll
you
see you
all.
in the next
Take
one.
care. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.